I guess to start, as you can see, it's 2008. It was our first TEDxTokyo. And it's always fun when we look back at some of the photos because it was either things maybe from Todd's apartment or my apartment or my school or whatever that we put on stage. So we had this really amazing stage design team that came together, right? Which was, what do we have from our house or apartment that might be interesting? But it was in 2008 that we launched TEDxTokyo. And you want to explain a little bit about TED maybe?
Does everybody know pretty much the TED conference? It started actually 30 years or so ago at Monterey, and it was just sort of a gathering of kind of a closed conference. At that time, there was no videos online, et cetera. So it was sort of a gathering of 500 interesting people that this architect, designer named Richard Saul Wurman thought would be interesting to have people at the intersection of technology, entertainment, and design. And the Monterey Aquarium is kind of a funky place with a pretty amazing aquarium and kind of off the beaten path. So you sort of got everybody out to this sort of interesting place, and they kind of hung out together for a week.
But TED, Todd was, you were involved with TED, what?
Well, I was working for Chris Anderson in the late 90s when he had been attending TED, and the original founder was thinking about selling it. And he sort of thought that if a normal company bought TED, they may kind of kill the spirit of it by just trying to maximize ticket sales and so on. So he bought it for his foundation. And then he was the one who made all of the steps to first put all of the talks for free on the internet, where a lot of people at the time said, if you do that, you're going to kill the brand. Why is anybody going to pay $5,000 to come to this conference if you're giving away the content for free? But he's a pretty smart guy and knew that counterintuitively, actually, if that helped make the brand more well-known, the actual secret of the conference was the people interacting. And so counterintuitively, he said, let's do it. And then, after that, then everyone saw that he was right.
So at that time, there wasn't really much of a culture around giving content away. And so that was kind of a neat step forward. And it was a big risk. And the complete opposite happened. I first heard about TED in 2007. I have an international school here called Tokyo International School, which I founded 20 years ago. It's a Sho Chugako with children from over 50 countries. And we were the first lighthouse model showcase school for Apple in the world outside of the United States. We were doing a one-to-one laptop program for the last 12 years or something like that, back when it was just this kind of vision. And one of the guys that had been attending TED was setting up something like 30,000 computers for a one-to-one program, and visited my school and said, you should go to TED. And I'm thinking, who's TED? Where's TED? What's a TED? And today I have to keep explaining to people that TED is not a teddy bear that talks trash, even though I like that movie as well. I heard the second one isn't nearly as good. But so the first session that I attended actually was this with, how many of you have seen this talk when she talks, she brings out the brain on stage, Dr. Jill Botte-Taylor. If you haven't seen this talk, it's pretty amazing. She's a neuroscientist at Harvard who has a stroke and describes the experience from the perspective of a neuroscientist. I think it's in the top 5 most watched talks on this particular talk. But I get the chills every time because I was sitting there and I was like, okay, this is what TED is all about. And nobody knew about her. So this particular session, there was quite a few people that missed this session because there were some unknown names there. And one of the secrets, or one of the wonderful things about TED, it isn't just about famous people. It's about an idea worth spreading. And if you have an idea worth spreading and you have some credibility to share that idea, then anybody can share that idea on stage. And that's kind of the essence in a lot of ways of TED. But what we got here, what's the next? Backward slide. And what a lot of people don't realize is that it's not just about what goes on the stage. Everything that you do should be an idea worth spreading. So a lot of the space outside of the main hall is set up for that. So I remember, one guy was getting a massage and others are lying and they're watching in bed, watching the screens. There's so much that you try to do that isn't just the typical, they're on stage, that's what we focus on. Everything, as much as possible, is about making an idea we're spreading. I mean, the after parties in Monterey were in an aquarium. And you should have seen when the live music, the fish jumping. It's quite interesting. You know, everything's a moving vibration, right? But it was really about creating an environment, an ambiance. And I think you guys are familiar with that here at Google. That's it's a similar-ish kind of concept or culture. So a couple of dreamers here, obviously not quite the dreamers of the two that you see here up on stage, but Todd and I met actually at my school quite a few years ago, and we found out we had a common interest, which was TED. And you had started with the salon, yeah?
Yeah, well, so we started talking about that we thought that TED as an open platform could sort of be an interesting trigger in Japan, because we sort of noticed that Japan has a lot of great ingredients, but there are also a lot of silos and a lot of cultural rules that prevent a lot of the mixing that happens at TED, where sort of even in the elevator, you talk to whoever, and sometimes just on your elevator ride down, you may have a new partner, a new idea that changes your trajectory. And so we thought that TED could be sort of an open platform where Japan could share within Japan some of its best ideas across silos, and then also share its ideas globally, and then globally look at some of the best ideas around the world. So it felt like sort of a neutral platform, but could be sort of a kikkake and a trigger. And so that's what excited us. And so I called up Chris and sort of told him what we were thinking about, and he said he could get us a live feed. And so Patrick was at TED, and then I was here in Jiugaoka, and we had a live feed from TED, and then we curated some gatherings in my Jiugaoka apartment with people from all the different events I'd been to. I would pick like one or two of the most eccentric or misfit or whatever, and then brought them all together. And I found out that there's not much of that in Japan, so it's actually hard to kick people out of your apartment because they're having so much fun at sort of a different sort of gathering. And then very quickly, it morphed into TED had been thinking about a new format. And so 8 months later from that first prototype, we were at the National Museum of Innovation and Emerging Science, the Mirai-Con, with Princess Takamado opening the event in Japan as the first international TEDx. And it was preceded by Princess Takamado was gracious enough to hold a salon at her place in the Royal Forest to meet a lot of interesting, diverse cultural figures in Japan, as well as 30-plus types of wine. And so I remember playing ping pong, with her in her high heels after sampling a lot of wine, and my main thought was just you didn't want her to trip and sprain her ankle before she's going to be speaking for TEDx. So that felt like strange things happen in Japan, at least for foreigners, like strange intersections.
When you said that, this image of, there's that kind of royal wave where you go like this. Did she play ping pong in a royal wave? It's just kind of this gracefully, I'll back up a little bit. Todd brushed over it, but TED was getting really popular, and everybody wanted TED in their city. And obviously, you just can't run around the world doing events. You can, actually, but that wasn't really the focus. And Chris Anderson, his core thing was as a media company, so he was trying to figure out ways of getting content out and spreading it out, but at the same time spreading the word. So people had asked if they could host their own local event, and TED wasn't ready for it. But we happened to be really well timed, and Todd brushed over it really quickly, but only us and Sydney had the live feed in the world, that they were testing with this live feed. So it was kind of fun. So in Todd's apartment in Jiugaoka, we're one of the test models for TED, with 20 people or 30 people that were gathering. And then it was a crazy time in the morning, I think, for you as well, which was kind of neat. But there was no X when we started off. And it was quite a challenge because in Japan, culturally, people don't go to a conference all day long, especially the Irai people, right? They go for an hour, they show their face, maybe they do a presentation, and nantika, then they leave kind of thing, right? So TED is 5 days, 80 speakers, and the most busiest, richest, famous people in the world get together, and they block 5 days for this. And so how do you transfer that into the culture of Japan? And so we decided Odaiba was the best place, and Miraikon was kind enough to work together with us. And so we launched it at the Miraikon, and with almost no budget, and nobody really understood the concept of it. So it was quite a kind of a reality distortion field in a lot of ways for people to conceptually bridge that gap. And like Todd had pretty much brushed on, maybe one other little point is, Japan has a very high level of creative intelligence, but not a high level of creative confidence. And one way of improving that confidence is through sharing your ideas and spreading those ideas, like Todd had mentioned, not just in Japan, but outside of Japan as well. And so we felt like some of those ideas could get outside of Japan, or for the 20 years I've been in Japan, it's been, or just downward spiral. So I thought maybe this would be a way to spark something. And so it was quite an experiment. It was quite fun to do that. And actually and this was the first event we had, and it wasn't full. We intentionally did not fill the hall. We wanted to make sure we had, it was 300 seats, we wanted to make sure we had 200 people that had an idea we're spreading. They could be on stage. They were a doer, a change maker, a thinker. And so like Todd said, one of the parts about TED you don't realize is most of the time people who have been going to TED, historically, they all have done something interesting. So no matter you look to your left, you look to your right, wherever you are, you know that conversation is going to be with somebody that has an idea worth spreading. And I think that's different as well in the way TED has been curated. What's interesting about Princess Takamado, and we'll speed this up and have some Q&A, is that when you have a princess come to an event or somebody in a royal family, there's a lot of protocol. And so she showed up, and there was all the protocol and the police and all those kind of things, right? And then she left. And then she came back. And the people at Miraikon panicked because they didn't know if it was private or if it was the royal family or what, right? And then she left. And then she came back. Then she left. Then she came back. And they were really, the thing they were most upset about with us was, which is she? I said, don't ask me. She's the one that keeps coming back, right? Kind of thing, right? And the other key thing for us being two foreigners, starting something in Japan, we needed some key Japanese collaborators. So we found some really solid Japanese people who invited 5 or 10 of their friends who trusted them. Because again, it was who's TED, what's TED, where's TED, why is TED, what's the theme, what's the main focus? There is no real theme. There is no real main focus. It's all about sharing ideas. That's the essence of it. And people try to put it in a box, but it's really just about sharing ideas.
And by definition, multidisciplinary, so that you can't have it on just a narrow set of ideas. So that's part like the cross-fertilization across different ideas, different fields.
And Todd and I have different roles. One of his passions has been creating an ecosystem in Japan and people. So Todd has focused a lot in our partnership on the participants that come, as well as the overall plan as well. I've had the pleasure and honor and joy and challenge of kind of producing the event. So working with the speakers, helping them come up with new ideas. And a lot of times, I would say probably close to 70% of the time, the idea, in a lot of ways, the speaker thought they were going to share changes. And there's a whole process around developing new ideas and brainstorming and coming to that. But part of my joy is to see how different in some ways that speaker can stretch themselves to share something differently, an idea we're spreading this differently. So anyway, this is Laura Stein. She was the director of TEDx, and she came and visited. And so wonderfully, the whole TEDx global movement was started in Tokyo. We are the second TEDx in the world. So that was kind of neat. A lot of pressure, a lot of challenge, but on the other hand, it's been amazing to see how it's grown, it's changed. And then a couple other things that were founded in Tokyo as well is TEDx Youth Day. I'm very involved with education and wanted to see a younger version of this. So TEDx Youth Day is where middle school and high school students run their own TEDx event. And we just had one on the 10th at Tokyo International School. And it was our 4th or 5th one. And it's so amazing to see junior high and high school students running cameras, doing everything. Literally choosing the speakers, training the speakers, doing speaker rehearsal. And it's been such a phenomenal experience. And if there's one movement I would really like to see happen in Japan, would be to see 100 youth events just spread throughout Japan. A lot of other things happened. With less than a month after the disaster in Tohoku, there was 2 university students that wanted to make a difference in Tohoku, so they approached us, and we founded together TEDxTokyo, which was 7 months after the disaster. So a lot of things have happened since then. There's a YZ, which is kind of a younger 20, 30-year-old group that haven't quite made it yet, but they're on their way, showing potential. There was Sendai with World Bank. The number of events, Kyoto's been doing some amazing events. And I don't know, Yusuke, do you know how many events we've had in Japan? Or you're getting ready to do something in Taipei. How many events have we had now in Japan? Do you know?
In 2015, we have 54 events.
So far?
In Japan.
In that year, you mean?
In a year.
In a year. So there's 54 events happening in Japan in a year. So it's definitely become a movement. Something else we launched was TEDx Teachers. So TEDx movement, TEDx youth, TEDx teachers the global movements have all been launched here in Tokyo, which is it's pretty neat to see how you have an idea and how it spreads and how you can create a movement around things. And we just had on the 10th, last Saturday. And we played with the format as well. Like last Saturday was more like a Saturday Night Live. We had a house band and various speakers and entertainers, but really tried to make it more like almost like an evening listening to music. Super Presentation, I don't know how many of you have seen this show, but it's been on now for 4 years? Something like that. And this has been really great as well for people to understand. One of the challenges I think anywhere for a lot of people is, especially in Japan, they want to put something into a box. So if you just say this is about ideas worth spreading, a lot of Japanese people have a hard time with that broad concept. But if it's about improving your presentation skills or becoming a better presenter and there's a skill, that's much easier, I think, for people to grasp. So they chose to call the show Super Presentation. It was a big challenge for TED because TED is not about teaching presentation. It's about ideas we're spreading. But initially, sometimes, and you guys probably understand this as well, sometimes for people to understand or conceptualize things or to accept something, you need to put it in a framework in which they can understand. And so that's why they called it Super Presentation. But the show, interesting enough, is watched mainly by high school and college students. If you ask NHK, any show that is watched mainly by high school, do high school students even know what NHK is, except for maybe the person that rings your doorbell to collect your money kind of thing, right? That's typically what they know about NHK, right? So it's been interesting. And amongst the high school and university students, TED is really, really strong in Japan. All right. Yeah, I don't know how many events have been taking place now. And through kind of TEDx and a lot of other things, there was an organization called Impact Japan that was founded about, how many years ago? 4 years, 5 years ago, something like that?
At least 5.
Yeah, and with William Saito and Kyoshi Kurakawa and Todd and I and Haruko Nishida started this because we wanted to create a platform and this kind of worked together with TEDxTokyo as well as some other organizations which you might recognize. Global Entrepreneurship Week, H Lab, Summer School, and Global Shapers Community. It's really wonderful reading this backwards here. And then since we've launched it, this is Marco Tempest, who's done more performances at the main TED than any other entertainer in the history of TED. So that was kind of neat. He started off at TEDxTokyo, and he's just kind of gone on and gone on and gone on. And then Mogi was the first speaker to speak at TED. And Mogi goes to TED regularly, actually. And if you've ever spent time with him, he's a good friend of mine. It's really hard to keep his attention. He's just like a big kid like I am. That's, I guess, why we're such good friends, right? We just run around like two kids that have ADHD kind of thing, right? But he actually sits for the whole 90-minute session and just concentrating and really being present, which says a lot, I guess, about the content of the session. And then you want to talk about?
Well, this is a photo from TED decided one year to go around the world and have global auditions to find new global talent. And Tokyo was one of the places, and we worked with Google and actually hosted it here.
Academy Hills on the 51st floor, right? And transformed that space into something that was kind of cool. And that was, I was sharing during lunchtime a little story around that. We're hesitant to host it here, but it was because we had the partnership with Google and Mori and all of that, we decided to do it. And what happens sometimes when you're curating things just kind of flow. And I remember personally what was wonderful is we had a couple hundred applicants that we had to narrow down to about 25 people. And I spent a day going through these hundreds of applicants and narrowing it down to, I think it was 35 or something like that. And the lady who picks the speakers for TED had done the same thing. We had almost exactly the same people. The one we had a little bit of discussion about, funny enough, was one of them was a taiko drummer. And then I realized, wow, I'm not sure they're going to allow for taiko drumming on the 51st floor of this building. And then I heard that we'd prefer, there was a certain noise level, and this taiko drum was like 3 times over that noise level, even though it was like 9 o'clock in the evening or something like that. It was much too late. So I asked the drummer, I said, just hide your taiko drum until just before you get on. We'll put you on last, right? For some reason, she didn't hear that. And of course, the noise police, security or whatever you want to call them, right, said, what's this over here? I'm going, it looks like a taiko drum, doesn't it? Are they planning on playing that? Oh, yeah, just a little bit, very softly. Like you don't play a taiko drum softly, and it just doesn't, right? So then they said, okay, well, no, I said, you can't get approval unless the people below you approve it. And it was Goldman Sachs, and I happen to know a lot of people, and I'm like, okay, let me make some telephone calls. And they were panicking because they just used that as an excuse, right? They didn't think I'd be able to call actually the president or the vice president of Goldman Sachs and get them to say yes, right? So there was a little of this panic look on their face, but I couldn't reach them, right? And so we ended up and just pretty much broke her heart because this was an audition, right? To be on the TED stage. It was kind of like an American Idol kind of thing, right? Or Asia's Got Talent kind of show that we did, right? But what was really cool, and it showed a good part of the culture that you have here, was that the team at Google said, don't worry about it. We'll do it at our after party. So we ended up having her perform to open the reception. I don't think it was the 27th floor, because it was sandwiched in between maybe a few others. Perform. So it really showed a little bit, I think, about your organization and culture and flexibility and making that work. But it was fun. It's a fun. And this is Black. He started off at youth. He had a dream, actually. His dream was to perform at Cirque du Soleil. And then he performed at TEDx Youth, and then Teachers, and then TEDxTokyo. And then he did the audition, and then he performed on stage. And now he's living in Canada performing for Cirque du Soleil. So that's another one of those kind of fun stories. And I guess, yeah, its branding might be interesting for some of the PR people here. So Tokyo Group approached Todd and some of the other team members about bringing TEDxTokyo to Hikarie, right?
Yeah, and we like the energy of Shibuya, and also we wanted to sort of change up the format every so often. So after 3 years of the MiraiCon, we thought sort of at the new Hikarie in the heart of Shibuya, we thought that was the perfect next step.
And so one of the things that Todd really wanted was to have some space, some co-working space. And Tokyo Group had Mauve on the 8th floor. I don't know if how many of you guys have been to Mauve on the 8th floor, but they said you can have some free space here if you have TEDxTokyo at Hikarie. They wanted to kind of co-brand, co-launch a little bit the new building with us. And the reason we did it, and I didn't quite mention this, the reason we did it at MiraiCon and Odaiba before is because we wanted people, typically these Irai people, who went out to Odaiba wouldn't just schedule a bunch of stuff on that day, because Odaiba's a little bit far, so they would give us a bit more of their normal time then. And we did it there, well, one, because it was near the ocean, and there was a lot of really cool things about that location. We had our picnic lunch kind of thing, or barbecue lunch, right there on the seaside, and then our after party was at Fune no Kaigakan, And so on that big tower, they'd never done a champagne party up there before. I mean, we were constantly doing TED-like things, you know. Like we had, you know, a lady hanging from the ceiling at the Meet Icon as well, part of Cirque du Soleil, which they'd never done before. I mean, a lot of what is fun about being involved with TED is that you have these, you create these expectations that people have to go further than they've ever gone before. And
Should we do a time check on like when's the Q&A?
I think about 3 or 4 minutes. Is what I was
Well, no,
saying.
so it's whatever,
Cool.
just put that around that.
So what the brand had gotten so strong and people had known about it, and Tokyo Group approached us. And so in the end, we had worked out quite a sweet deal for a lot of free PR, because they have a lot of assets like trains running and you know, putting posters in the trains. Also, let's see if I have it up here. This, I mean, I remember sitting and looking at this a couple days before, I think it was 1 week before they were showing these up on the screen. And we were actually the first event they'd ever done parts of it live on this screen before. And that's when, for me at least, was the point where I think we've created a movement here. I think we're onto something here. And that was, for me, a really big moment, looking up on that screen there, or even parts of it live when that happened. But it's evolved in a lot of things. And one of the other things that's, again, I just want to share a little bit more about the culture, and I think you understand this here at Google in a lot of ways, is it's not just about what happens on the stage. It's everything else is as interactive and kind of creative and idea worth spreading as possible. And when we moved to Hikarie, one of the biggest challenges was where our after party was going to be. So we think, well, maybe we'll block off Cat Street and we'll have some live bands. But we got to talk to the police, and it's going to be a little Menroku size, so maybe not. And then it was like, oh, we'll do it at Kokuren Daigaku. I knew the Gakucho. And we could do cool lighting, and we could block that off and have a really cool party. And then it hit us. Why don't we do it at Kono Hachimangu? And the Japanese people who were with us were going, you can't do that at Kono Hachimangu. I'm like, why not? They're like, you can't do that at Kono Hachimangu. I'm like, why not? Have you asked? They're like, no. So we went the next day, and we'd had a previous introduction, and we went the next day with Johnny Walker, and the nephew of the kind of the owners of Kono Hachimangu, which is 900 years old, said, you want to bring TED to Kono Hachimangu? And we said, yes. And he said, yoroshiku onegai itashimasu. So here is a 400-year-old stage. I'm trying to remember their name. Do you remember the name of these guys?
Open Reel Ensemble.
The Open Reel Ensemble. And they were jamming on this 400-year-old stage, and it was another one of those kind of moments that was just so kind of cool and special. But again, it's not just about what happens on the stage, and I think we'll probably end it right around there. And there's been, it's 100% volunteer is the other thing. So at one stage, last year we decided to downsize, but we had this, like, what was next for us? Tokyo Dome, 10,000 people, or, it was like this kind of mega TED kind of thing, because it had gotten a little bit ridiculous. But 100% volunteers are, raising, was it $200,000 for a day event, run all by volunteers, at a level that actually probably blows away most events. But it got to be a lot of pressure and a lot of stress for people, and it wasn't fun anymore. And internally, people were kind of fighting and stressed a little bit and not really enjoying the process of having the event anymore. So we decided last year to just, this year, to just downsize it, having a couple hundred people and have it an evening and have it much more intimate, because the movement is out. The word is out. It's happening. We can do nothing now, and it's still going to continue to grow and to evolve into different things. And yeah, there's a lot of other possible things. But what's been interesting is just to see, I think for a lot of people, what TED equals is kind of internal self-discovery. Because there's a couple thousand videos that are there, pretty well curated, and looking at things in ways maybe that you haven't looked at them. And for me personally, it's been an ongoing journey of just looking at something that I'm thinking about, connecting the unconnected, Yui. And that's, I think, a lot about what TED is about, is if you think, when you come up with new ideas, is when something that's unconnected and something that's unconnected becomes connected, and you have that aha moment. So even when we're curating the speakers, we do the Ichiban Kankenai lineup. Most people think, okay, here's the theme, so we're going to make these, I'm doing a project for Dentsu next week in London. And there's like food day and this day and that day kind of thing, and it's all grouped up and it's all makes sense. But the idea with TED is for it not to make sense, to be unconnected. And then boom, the connection happens. Anything you want to add? Yeah. And then it's been interesting. Yusuke, who's just joined 4 months ago, right, has been very much he's probably the most active TEDx person in Japan. I've been to more events and so very much part of the movement and bringing the movement forward and continuing the movement. Because I'm a big kid and I like children, and I really, looking at the future, I would love to see 100+ youth and university events spread throughout Japan. And the difference I see in the university students who maybe don't know what they're going to do, as well as the younger the high school and junior high school students, the impact on this has been really, really huge. So, something you want to learn more about?